You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke McKenna, but today's case is a taken baby found 17 years later in a selfie. Now, this is a survival story that is much different than those we have covered previously. This was a baby who was kidnapped but found when she was practically an adult. The way in which she was identified is something that is close to a miracle. The years went by, but the distance between them did not. And before I tell you the whole story in this summary, I'll stop there and let you ponder what this really means before I explain everything. By the way, I post so much content like this. It is my absolute passion to tell these stories, and I mean no harm or disrespect when I do so. So if you would like to support me in doing so, all you have to do is make sure you are subscribed with the post notification bell on, give this video a thumbs up, and leave a nice comment down below. I also want to thank today's sponsor, which is June's Journey, and we have worked with them here before on this channel, and I'm really excited to be working with them again because I truly do love this game. June's Journey is a free murder mystery game on iPhone and Android where you are really solving murders, of course, fictional murders. Now, I absolutely love this because it encompasses everything that I enjoy. It's vintage, it's crime, and it makes you feel like you are in a murder mystery film, except it's interactive too, so you are actually getting to solve it as you go. You go through this game feeling like a top detective, and it's all within your own hands. Now, this game has kept my mind occupied and sane during these times of quarantine, and if you want to try it out for yourself, there will be a link down below in the description that you can click, and it is completely free. Like I said, the only reason that there is a link is so they can track how many of you actually wanted to play the game because of me, and it really helps to just support this channel and make sure we can have more sponsors in the future and continue working with wonderful sponsors like June's Journey. So yeah, if you would like to try it out, please make sure you click the link down below, and thank you June's Journey for sponsoring this portion of the video. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 1997 in South Africa, and Morne and Celeste Nurse lived in Cape Town. They were a small family of two, but they were expecting their first child. Now, this was a little baby girl. The family was so excited and filled with love. They were trying to become a bigger family, and it was something that they were both so passionate about, and they really couldn't wait until the baby girl was in their arms. And then in April, it was time. Celeste went to the Groote Schuur Hospital, and on April 30th, she gave birth to a little healthy baby girl. They ended up naming this baby Zephany. Now, because Celeste had a C-section, of course, more recovery time, so she was still at the hospital 3 days later, and they would be bonding, and then that is when the worst thing possible that could happen to a mother occurred. That day, Celeste put Zephany in her little cot, which was right next to her bed, and she ended up falling asleep because Zephany was asleep. And when she woke up, there was a nurse in her bedroom asking her over and over again where this baby was. She, woke up flustered saying, "She's in the cot, she's right next to me." And the nurse proceeded to tell her that she was not. The only thing in this cot was a baby's nest, and that is when the hospital called the police and the search began. And the hospital was canvassed from top to bottom looking for Zephany as her mother became even more distraught. Now, the searchers didn't come up empty-handed. They actually did find several things around this hospital that led them to believe that this was connected to the disappearance of Zephany. Now, this was Zephany's baby garment as well as a handbag that was found inside the hospital. The handbag had no identification. There was nothing really of importance or to show who this person was. That is when a tunnel was searched, and this tunnel in this hospital was meant for women who were going into labor to have direct access from the outside of the hospital to the maternity ward in case, they were in dire need of getting a doctor to help them while they were in labor. Going into labor is sometimes a sporadic traumatic thing and you can't really plan for it. And so this was just made to make sure that it was the easiest way possible for these women to get to their doctor. But this also meant that if they could get in easily, they could get out easily. And this led right to the outside where this person could have disappeared with Zephany in seconds. It also meant that there was no sign of Zephany anywhere. And it was in 1997, so there weren't any security cameras in or around this hospital. When investigators talked to Celeste, she did tell them that she remembered another nurse coming in right before she fell asleep. This nurse was comforting her, telling her, she needed to get some rest, kind of soothing her while also taking care of Zephany, and so she felt really comfortable to go to sleep. But now she didn't see this nurse anywhere. The other staff said that the woman she was describing was someone they had never seen before, but it was someone the patients had seen. The other patients in the maternity ward. You see, another woman said she saw this nurse come in and she was wearing maroon pants and an oatmeal colored top, and she talked to her. And this was all that that woman could say, but there was another woman who had a very concerning story. And this was that she actually walked in to her bedroom to see this exact nurse holding her baby. And she kind of asked her, "What are you doing?" And the nurse said, "Oh, your baby was just crying, so I was comforting her and just helping you out." But this woman got a really eerie feeling, and the nurse left the baby and left the room. As the search for Zephany continued, the family began to believe that she had been kidnapped by a woman who had a perfect plan to get away unnoticed. Investigators had found something in this tunnel. There was a pillow in there, and this pillow was thought to be what this nurse, the person posing as a nurse, used under her shirt to make it appear as though she looked pregnant. Another just facade that she could hide behind in a ward full of pregnant women. No one would ask her what she was doing there if she looked like she was pregnant. And then once she had a baby in her hands that was Zephany, it appeared as though she ditched the pillow. But no one knew why this woman wanted a baby. Was it a personal kidnapping? Was she possibly someone in the family or someone who knew the family? Was this just a woman who wanted a child? Or was this possibly child trafficking? Each one was horrific in their own way, and 2 days of searching led to no more clues than they originally had found. So the nurse family, who had entered that hospital with all of the hope in the world, were leaving empty-handed 5 days later, a part of their family missing. They believed that this was just some sort of sick joke and that they would go home and the baby would be there and waiting for them. But they arrived home and it was empty. And this is how it stayed for months and then years. Celeste and Morne began to have different interviews begging for their daughter back, saying that people could send in information anonymously and just to let them know where their daughter was. Celeste said her intention was to steal a child. She didn't care which child it was, which was the new theory in this case, that she was just going from room to room, this kidnapper, and she just was looking for an opportunity to take a baby. It wasn't an attack on Zephany herself. In fact, they believed it could have been the baby that the mother walked in on the nurse holding, and she just thankfully caught this woman before she could take her baby, and so this woman went on to Zephany. That didn't make the family feel any better though, and as the years went by and Zephany wasn't found, they continued to celebrate her birthday every single year, constantly hoping that she would come home, and she never took a back seat in her family's minds. That is when investigators finally got a tip. And this was from a woman who said that her neighbor suddenly had a baby, and she had never seen that this woman was pregnant. So she was very confused, and this child also looked a lot like Zephany. So she was calling the police to see if they could investigate and see if this in fact was the kidnapped girl. So the investigators got there and they questioned the mother, only to find out that this child was actually a boy. So it could not be Zephany, and they were back to square one. To cope with the loss, the family, like I said, did always come together to celebrate her birthday, and Celeste would talk to families of other kidnapped children just to, feel that support. within one another and to be able to lean on different people and help them in times of crisis. And Celeste and Morne actually went on to have 3 more children together. And they also would end up divorced. And, this happens a lot in kidnapping cases where, looking at the spouse of your child that's missing is just too much. And so they did end up separating, but they would always come back together on April 30th when she had been born, and they would celebrate for her regardless of their personal issues. 12 long years had gone by, and the parents had watched their other 3 children grow up, and they had always known in the back of their mind that Zephany was out there somewhere growing up with somebody else. They just hoped that she wasn't in too much pain. That is when they would receive a call in July of 2009, and there was a woman who whispered on the other side. She said, "I know about your daughter." Then she proceeded to ask for 500,000 South African rand, which is about $70,000. But this was to be dropped off in a prearranged place, and the family immediately contacted the police to, have some backup, and the police were watching this drop-off area to make sure that nothing horrible happened. But this is when they would go to this drop-off site, they would have the money, but unfortunately no one would ever come to get it. That is when the police tracked this phone number to a woman. Her name was Glinda Dubel, and when they tracked her address, they realized that she lived right next to Celeste's mother, who knew about this whole kidnapping. There were no children inside of her home, and it was thought that she had made this call to try to extort money out of the family going through such a traumatic time. She was charged with extortion and sentenced to 3 years house arrest with 600 hours of community service. But this meant that Zephany was not with her, and they still didn't know where she was. Once again, the family was heartbroken, and their other children were growing up not knowing who their big sister was and how she acted and how she would have been to them as a big sister. They never got to experience having the oldest sibling around them. But one of their children actually knew a lot more than she could have ever expected. You see, it was now 2015, and their second born was a girl named Cassidy, and she was now 14 years old and going into Zwaski High School as a freshman. She began to make friends really quickly, and one of which was a high school senior who was 17-year-old Michelle Solomon. And the two had met in the corridor at school and felt like an instant connection toward each other. They felt like they knew each other and didn't understand why they were feeling that way, but they instantly connected and began to hang out all the time. Michelle and Cassidy got even closer, and Cassidy believed that Michelle was like the big sister that she was lacking all of those years. It just felt like this was a person who could fill that hole in her heart. Cassidy even began calling Michelle big sis, and Michelle would call her little girl or baby girl. And Michelle would often take her to the bathroom in school, give her little makeovers, do her hair, do her makeup, and Michelle felt like she knew Cassidy too. She felt very protective over her. They were inseparable. And that is when people who would see them together started asking if they were sisters. Now, their response was that they didn't know. Maybe it was in another life that they were siblings, but they didn't think much of it, because even though people were saying, you guys do look a lot alike, they were saying everybody has doppelgangers. We just happen to be in the same school as one of ours, and they thought it was really cool. But once Cassidy's parents heard about this, they wanted to know much more. That's when they were shown a selfie that Cassidy had taken with Michelle, and they were in complete shock. These two didn't just look kind of similar. They were identical. And Cassidy had told them that people kept asking Michelle if she was adopted, and she would laugh it off and tell them not to be crazy. So she said, she wasn't adopted. she continues to say that, that's crazy to think that. But Cassidy's parents weren't just going to stop there. They didn't believe that it was too crazy of a theory that she had been adopted. And meanwhile, Michelle's family was shown the same selfie, and they agreed that the girls did look alike. And her father, Michael, even said that he had seen Cassidy before at her father's electrical shop when he would go in there to buy different things. But that is when Cassidy's father, Morne, would ask if he could take them out for some takeaway. They went to a local McDonald's and they kind of just met up to talk for a little bit. And after this, Celeste and Morne spoke, and then they were very serious when they talked to Cassidy next, saying she needed to ask Michelle one very important question. A few weeks later, Michelle would be taken out of math class and told to go to the headmaster's office. When she got there, she had no idea what it was for, and she was greeted by 2 social workers, because Cassidy had simply asked her that one question. And Michelle had said yeah. Her birthday was April 30th, 1997. Was she stalking her Facebook? How did she know that? Well, Cassidy and her family did know that, and they knew exactly what that could mean. The Nurse family had contacted investigators, and they had begun to dig into the Solomons and who they were, and what they found caused 2 social workers to end up at their school talking to Michelle Solomon. Now, Michelle was being told about a child named Zephany Nurse, and that she might know the identity of this newborn baby. Michelle was very confused. She didn't know the identity. She had no idea what they were talking about, and they asked her, "Where were you born?" She said, "My mom told me it was about 20 minutes away from here at Retreat Hospital." She said that there was even proof on a birth certificate that she saw one time. But investigators quickly informed her that they had looked into this, and there was no records of her being born at this hospital. Michelle said that she would do the DNA test that they were offering because she was positive that it would be negative and they would end all of this and go back to their normal lives. She began to say that her mother Lavona and her father Michael would never lie to her, especially about who she was and where she came from. And Michelle said that she had a wonderful childhood. She lived in Lavender Hill in Cape Town. This was the same town that the Nurse family lived in, and her mother called her princess and would often take her to the mall and to the movies, and she said that her mother was always there for her 24/7, and her father, she said, was her rock, her hero. He was soft and gentle, and her dad, she looked up to him so much. So at 17 years old, she was going in to take a test that could change her life forever, but she didn't believe that it would, because she knew the truth about her life. Her parents had told her the truth, right? Well, the DNA test came back saying that Michelle Solomon was in fact Zephany Nurse, that her biological sister was her best friend Cassidy, and that she had been kidnapped at birth. No one could have believed that a selfie would solve a missing persons case that was nearly 2 decades old, and she had grown up 5 kilometers away or 3 miles from her biological family. It would often play in a field right across from their home. Now, of course, the Nurse family were ecstatic, and they knew that they had found their baby 17 years later. But for Michelle, this was a complete and utter shock. She was being taken away from the only family she had ever known. Social workers took her into custody, and she was told she wouldn't be going back home because her mother was being arrested. Mother meaning the woman who kidnapped her and forced her to believe that she was her mother. But Michelle began to feel this time that her life was out of control. She wanted her mother, and she wanted to ask her, what she did, if any of this was true, and this was the person that she relied on. And now everyone was saying that that person was a liar. One part of her wanted to run away with Lavona and Michael, but she also wanted to get close to her biological parents. So she was torn between the people who raised her in love and the people who conceived her in love and had yearned to love her for 17 years. But the Nurse family wanted to, meet her and really introduce themselves as her parents immediately, and they arranged a meeting at the police station, and they began to hug and cry. Michelle was taken aback by all of this love, but Celeste and Morne, they knew that she was their daughter, and they said that they knew from the moment that they saw this girl that she was Zephany. But Michelle didn't know if she should push away or love them back. But she decided that the family had been through so much, so she hugged them back, and even though they were still strangers, she was going to try to show some sort of happiness. But part of her still wanted to be with the family she had known, the family she had grown up with. But Michelle did quickly get comfortable with this new family, especially with Cassidy, since she was already a big part of her life, being her best friend. She began to call it Celeste and Morne, mom and dad, which is something that they had wanted to hear from her since she was first born, and they never got the chance to.
For me, it still feels like I'm living a dream. Somebody needs to pinch me so I can wake up. So it's still a lot to process for me, and it hurts, 17 years, this woman took Zephany away from us. And that's basically the foundation where a mother and a child forms a bond. And to meet her after 17 years, it hurts you. It takes a lot away.
Lavona was still in custody, but Michael still needed to be questioned because they didn't know whether he had any part in this kidnapping or not. Michelle was actually in the room when he would be taken in to be talked to, and Michael would immediately ask her, "Why are you here? What is happening?" He looked extremely stressed, and that's when he told the police that he didn't do anything and that Michelle was his daughter. He wasn't a part of any of this. He even asked how she could not be his daughter. He began to explain that Lavona had been pregnant, and then she came home with a baby, and he believed that she had just given birth. Now, he was eventually released, and investigators said they didn't believe he knew anything about this kidnapping. So, just Lavona would be taken to trial, and at this time, she was actually not named due to the fact that they were trying to keep the minor, who was, Michelle Solomon, from getting released to the public, her name, her identity. So they kept the mother's name private as well, or the kidnapper's name private as well. And investigators believed that Lavona had been pregnant, but she had a miscarriage and decided to go and steal a child instead of coming to terms with the fact that she lost her own. Now, in March of 2016, Lavona actually pled not guilty for kidnapping, fraud, and contravening the Children's Act of South Africa. Now, this is for care, contact, and protection of children and prohibits child abduction. But Lavona was in this courtroom where she wore a cloth over her face to hide her face from the public. And Michelle and her biological parents, as well as Michael, were all in the courtroom. But Lavona continued to say that she didn't do anything wrong. But she also talked about having trouble conceiving a child, that she had miscarriages, and was desperate to adopt. But what she would say next would shock everyone, because Lavona said she didn't kidnap this baby from the hospital, but somebody else might have for her. And Lavona said she was getting a fertility treatment from a woman named Sylvia, who then offered her a full baby. Lavona said she was told that the baby's mother didn't want the baby and was giving it up for adoption. So of course she said she wanted it. Now, investigators searched for Lavona's connection to a woman named Sylvia, and they couldn't find a thing. And you'd think that if she was getting fertility treatment, it would have had to been at a center that has some records that at least showed she was there, but nothing was found. But what they did find was a witness who finally came forward saying that they saw a woman who looked just like Lavona carrying out Zephany that day at the hospital. And this woman was brought in to the police station to pick out who this was. From a lineup, she immediately picked Lavona.
You're standing by your story that somebody gave you the baby. You said you didn't kidnap her.
Yes, I didn't kidnap her. They must not judge me. In the Bible, if they Mr. Nurse know the Bible. You must not judge people, condemn people. And I asked Mr. Nurse not to judge me. That was in the past. It's now the future. I did ask forgiveness yesterday for the nurses because I never knew she was stolen.
Seeing Lavona at trial, Michelle was really distraught. She struggled to see the person she believed was her mother in handcuffs in a place for criminals. and she didn't know how to process what was being told to her. 6 months later, Lavona was sentenced to 10 years in prison, and in fact, the judge even mentioned that she showed no remorse at the trial. In fact, prosecutors said that she only tried to make herself look like the victim. Moshe was heartbroken about this. She didn't feel like justice was given to her because everyone else saw this woman as a kidnapper, but she saw her as a mother. Moshe said that she still loved her and forgave her. And Moshe went through so much that last year of her high school that she actually had to stop going to school for a while and get some therapy before going back and graduating. A few months later, Moshe would actually choose to go see Lavona in prison through a window. And she told her, "By knowing I'm not your blood, that I actually belong to someone else, and that you've robbed them of possibilities and changed my whole destiny, hurt me. How am I supposed to believe your word when you've lied to me, saying that I am your child? You broke your trust with me. You are going to have to come clean if you want to have a relationship with me." Moshe was also pregnant at this time and was crying uncontrollably at the fact that Lavona was in a, prison uniform, and she was just very emotional about the whole thing. But the one thing that she demanded was Lavona to tell her the truth. Instead, Lavona started giving her advice about her pregnancy and told her that she would tell her what happened one day, but not that day. However, she still said that she didn't do it. Now at this time, the public only knew what happened to a baby named Zephany Nurse. They had no idea who Moshe Solomon was, and Moshe wanted to change that. She actually applied for the ban restricting her name to be lifted, and this was in 2019. As soon as this was lifted, she released her book under her name called Zephany, Two Mothers, One Daughter, An Astonishing True Story, and it was dedicated to both of her mothers. Now, she said that she still goes by Moshe because she feels like that shows how much she went through and who she was when she didn't know her life was a lie, but she also knows that it is a lie, and that is why she also goes by Zephany, who taught her how to be strong and forced her to find the truth. And so she wants to be respectful to both parents who gave her those names, and so she goes by Moshe Zephany. At first she said she hated the name Zephany because it forced her to really change her whole life, and she loved her life before, and so she kind of said that she blamed her biological parents for making her, the mother she knew, go to prison, and she really had so much hatred. But now she has kind of realized that they were just trying to find their daughter, and she was deserving of the truth to come out eventually. I think it's just even more emotional, the fact that this happened when she was 17 years old, a teenager that already has trouble processing things, and this was thrown on her as well. But I really wanted to add in Zephany's own thoughts on all of this that happened to her, because she is more than willing to talk about her stories. So I wanted you guys to hear it from her because I think it's really eye-opening. So here's an interview that she did, and I hope you enjoy.
I finally get to say what I really been keeping in for so long, and just to tell my story. Why I actually decided to meet them on the day was I felt that I owed it to them. I felt that my mommy really hurt you guys. That was running through my mind, and this is the least I can do to say sorry for her part, to show you how I was raised, and
Tell us about your childhood.
well, from what I can remember, my childhood was, it was a stable, and it was as any healthy, normal childhood. Me and my dad, we used to go camping at Sudwata, and the family would go it. And, Christmas times, my daddy is so traditional, and he has made Lavona like that. He's still like that. And we would have a Christmas tree every year, and photos were taken, and I knew, even growing up into a teenager, I always got what I wanted, and we were never rich, but we never lacked anything. I always got what I wanted, and if mommy and daddy couldn't do it this month, I understood that, okay, mommy and daddy can only do it next month, or mommy and daddy can only do it now and then. But there was also a good level of understanding.
What did Lavona teach you? I mean, how did she bring you up? What kind of mom was she?
She was the pants in the house. She was mommy say. You know, daddy would say, and I could twist my daddy's fingers, and I still do it today. But I know not to take advantage of him. He's so supportive. He's one of, yeah, he's amazing. But mommy, you know, like, we always had that relationship where I could talk to her.
Lavona is still in prison today, and Michelle lives nearby at the family home with her, you could say, the father that she grew up knowing was her father, Michael. So not her biological father, but the one she grew up with. And now she has 2 children that she lives with as well. Now, she said that she chose to live with Michael instead of her biological family because both of her parents, her biological parents, were living with family at the time, and she was still learning to bond with them, and she figured, you know, she had the closest bond with Michael, so she stayed with him because Michael's home was her safe place. She also said that she now believes that Lavona did kidnap her, but she also says, forgiving brings so much healing into your heart. Life must go on. She knows that I forgive her, and she knows that I still love her. She says that she has already loved Lavona through the pain and finding out that she wasn't her mother. So she just hopes one day she can hear the full story from Lavona. But she's still denying the kidnapping to this day. Michelle survived right under the noses of her biological family, and her biological father, Morne, said that he can't forgive and he never will forgive his daughter's abductor for taking her from them. And I do think that it would be hard to forgive an abductor even if your child is safe and back with you in a sense, because you will never get those years back that you missed. And although she appears to have been treated well, she's never going to bond the same with her biological parents as she did with Lavona and Michael, because she believed they were her parents since she was a child. I think lying in this way, like Lavona did to Michelle, is a sign or a way to psychologically manipulate her. And I think that that is trauma in itself. And so for the biological parents to be angry at her for doing this, I think is completely acceptable, because just like if a child was kidnapped and harmed or kidnapped and killed, those parents aren't just going to forgive that person for what they did. But I think it's probably even harder because it really does seem like Michelle is having a really hard time bonding with Celeste and Morne, even though they searched for her for 17 years, because they're not what she knows. She already has parents. I mean, the most crucial years in a child's life to bond is from a baby to 5 years old. They only saw her for 3 days. That's it. But yeah, I just think it's absolutely insane that this baby was found after being missing for 17 years with a photograph. I feel like that's just something that seems like it would be out of a movie, but this actually happened. And the fact that her best friend actually was her sister and they were acting like sisters before this all happened, it just goes to show that there's something in the universe that, you know, pulls us towards one another in a way that we could never imagine. And so I don't know, I just thought it was a really kind of a miracle story to bring to you guys. And you know, it was a little easier to stomach because she did have a good childhood and she didn't grow up in a horrible environment. But like I said, just because she wasn't tortured, and I'm really happy she wasn't, doesn't mean she wasn't psychologically manipulated, doesn't mean she wasn't lied to for her entire life. And the fact that she was taken away from the people who brought her onto this earth, and they did nothing wrong to get her to be taken away from them. And it really was just a stroke of bad luck that she chose to take their baby over anyone else's. It could have been anyone. And the fact that she didn't move away and they ended up going to the same high school is just incredibly amazing. But I don't think that just because Michelle wasn't harmed that Lavona should get a free pass on what she did, if that makes sense. I'd love to know what you think about that. My heart breaks for the Nurse family because I know that they are probably struggling right now with knowing that they found their daughter, but knowing that it will never be the same as if they raised her. I also wanted to say that I found another true crime YouTuber while doing this case who I believe is from South Africa as well, and her name is Mufundo Nadala. I hope I'm saying that right, but I will leave her link down below because I love finding new true crime YouTubers and supporting them, and I think that her videos are really well done. So I wanted to shout her out and give her some love and support, and I hope you guys do go over and support and, you know, leave some nice comments for her. Also, don't forget to check out June's journey down below if you haven't already, because I really do think you guys will like this game as much as I do. I seriously play it all the time. It's the one time that I give myself freedom to relax, because I feel like it's still working my brain, because you're actually, you know, trying to find things, trying to remember things like you're an investigator. So yeah, I really like it, and I hope that you do too, and please make sure to click my link if you want to download it. And don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye!